Hey everyone, this is Sanskriti Varshanay from Molecular Detectives. Here, I share information about cancer, from the molecular level to things in our daily lives and environment that affect cancer development. My goal is to explain the intriguing science behind cancer in meaningful episodes that will help you understand preventative measures, cancer signs, and treatment methods, and ultimately for you to make evidence-based decisions to minimize the risk of cancer. Thank you for joining me in today's episode, and I hope you enjoy. It's not necessarily that one-time exposure. It's a repeated exposure over time. This is a quote by Alyssa Tatum, who is a clinical dietitian at the MD Anderson Cancer Center. I like this quote because in this episode, I'm going to dive into carcinogens and some common ones you may find in daily life, from tobacco smoke to processed meat, and what the science says. By the end of this episode, you'll be able to understand how these substances trigger changes at the cellular level. However, while I hope this episode encourages you to think about your daily health choices, I also don't want you to excessively worry about many risks that you can't control. Carcinogens do cause cancer, but not from minimal exposure. Your body can still function properly with a few mutations in your genes, because there are many other genes responsible for fixing those mutations or helping your body out in other ways. However, more and more exposure will lead to more mutations, which can eventually cause cancer if you're not careful. I also like this quote because it gives you hope to make decisions that will help you avoid cancer. There are certain carcinogens that are more harmful than others, and there are certain carcinogens that you can be more in control of than others. For example, smoking, consuming alcohol, and being exposed to UV radiation are some of the most dangerous carcinogens, but they're also controllable. Maybe you have smoked or consumed alcohol in the past and have spent an excessive amount of time in the sun. But after becoming informed, you can make the choice to limit or eliminate drinking and smoking. And if you love the outdoors, you can make the choice to apply sunscreen to protect your skin. This episode will uncover carcinogens and even some concerning information, but hopefully you will come out on the other side with information you can use to make healthy choices. Now, let's get into the content. What are carcinogens? A carcinogen is a substance that can increase your risk of developing cancer. Exposure to a carcinogen doesn't necessarily cause cancer, but it makes the risk more likely to happen. Carcinogens have existed on Earth from about 1.7 million years ago, but in today's generation, the number of carcinogens has increased due to advancements in technology, such as the food industry, the beauty industry, and the manufacturing industry. Many carcinogens are especially associated with these industries. According to the Cleveland Clinic, there are more than 100 identified carcinogens, and they have many forms. Carcinogens can be in physical form, such as harmful UV rays, chemical form, such as tobacco smoke and asbestos, and in biological form, such as viral infections. So how do you know if something is a carcinogen? Well, this is determined by organizations that evaluate possible carcinogens to see if they are harmful or not. There are two big organizations that do this, and they are the IARC, which is the International Agency for Research on Cancer, and the NTP, which is the National Toxicology Program. These agencies evaluate substances and determine if there's strong evidence to support that a substance can cause cancer. Each organization has their own lists with many carcinogens listed, but just because a substance is listed on one agency's list and not on the other's list doesn't mean that it's not a carcinogen or that there's some sort of disagreement. The other agency just may not have evaluated it yet. So according to the IARC, there are 5 carcinogen classification groups. Group 1 carcinogens are carcinogenic to humans. There's strong evidence from studies in humans that show that the substances cause cancer. Some examples are alcoholic beverages, tobacco smoke, UV radiation, and processed meats. Group 2A carcinogens are probably carcinogenic to humans. There is not that much evidence in humans, but there's enough evidence in animals that suggests that the substances cause cancer. Some examples are biomass fuel like wood, glyphosate, which is a herbicide, and emissions from high-temperature frying. Group 2B carcinogens are possibly carcinogenic to humans. There is less evidence in animals and even little evidence in humans that suggests that the substances can cause cancer. Some examples include aloe vera, non-decolorized whole leaf extract, aerocoline, and engine exhaust. Group 3 carcinogens are not classifiable as to their carcinogenicity to humans, which means that there isn't enough evidence that supports if the substance is actually carcinogenic to humans or animals. An example in this category is caffeine. And finally, group 4 carcinogens are probably not carcinogenic to humans. Evidence highly supports that the substance doesn't cause cancer in humans and animals. An example of this is caprolactam, which is used in making nylon, and it's actually the only substance in this category. So that may not be very reassuring, but again, going back to the quote, exposure to a carcinogen is not a definitive indicator of getting cancer. Even exposure to a carcinogen 2 or 3 times isn't enough to get cancer. It's everyday exposure and in high concentrations that make them dangerous for our bodies. Exposure to carcinogens at workplaces can be dangerous, since you go to a workplace almost every day and continuous exposure is bad for you. But unless that's happening to you, you don't need to panic about every single carcinogen that you may be coming in contact with. According to the NTP, there are only 2 carcinogen classification groups. Group 1 has substances that are known to be human carcinogens because there's strong evidence that suggests that the substances cause cancer in humans, and some examples of these are tobacco smoke, UV radiation, and arsenic in drinking water. Group 2 has substances that are reasonably anticipated to be human carcinogens because there's enough evidence in animals but not that much in humans to support that the substances cause cancer. And some examples of these are lead, diesel exhaust, and styrene, which is used in plastics. So you can tell that there's quite an overlap in substances, and both agencies' lists include many of the same substances. You can easily find these lists of carcinogens with a quick Google search if you're more interested. Now, to answer the big question, how exactly do carcinogens lead to cancer? Well, there are many different ways. Some carcinogens cause mutations to DNA, which lead to the production of different proteins than those intended. Some may change bases in nucleotides in DNA, and some may break strands of DNA. Some can lead to mutations in genes. Let me introduce you to 3 types of genes: proto-oncogenes, tumor suppressor genes, and DNA repair genes. Proto-oncogenes are genes that help cells become specialized, and they regulate cell growth. However, when they get mutated or activated by a carcinogen, they turn into oncogenes, which literally means genes causing cancer tumors. Oncogenes cause cancer by inducing uncontrolled cell growth. Proto-oncogenes, the normal and healthy version of this gene, regulate cell growth, but oncogenes don't, and they promote more cell division. Since there's no regulating gene telling cells to stop dividing, the growth of a tumor begins and will increase over time. Tumor suppressor genes are genes that regulate and slow down cell growth and division. Specifically, they make sure that cells are dividing at an appropriate pace, and if there happens to be something wrong with the cell, for example, if it's not functioning properly, then it'll guide the cell to apoptosis, which is when the cell kills itself, or programmed cell death. A carcinogen may target a tumor suppressor gene to not work properly. That means that the gene won't be able to limit cell division, and cells will keep dividing out of control and eventually lead to cancer. Finally, let's talk about DNA repair genes. DNA repair genes fix DNA mistakes when cells replicate. Because replicating DNA in a cell is a very complicated process, mistakes in the replication may be made. DNA repair genes either fix the mistakes, or if there are too many mistakes that the genes can't fix, then they guide the cell to apoptosis so that the cell won't be able to pass down its mistakes to new cells. However, when a carcinogen causes mutations in these genes, the repair genes aren't able to fix the mistakes inside cells or trigger apoptosis. So cells with mistakes will keep dividing to create more cells with mistakes, which leads to cancer as well as other problems. Now, let's talk about some common carcinogens. I've heard about processed meat being called a Group 1 carcinogen by the IARC, but processed meat is widely consumed, and it's a really big part of people's diets. However, it can be very dangerous if consumed regularly in large amounts. Some examples of processed meats include pepperoni, hot dogs, and sausage. It's recommended by the National Health Service for England to consume 70 grams or less of processed meat per day. But now, how do these meats actually cause cancer? Well, processed meats often contain added nitrates and nitrites to preserve them, and in the body, these compounds can form carcinogens called N-nitroso compounds, such as nitrosamines. These compounds can cause damage to DNA in cells, and the damage can lead to other cells having the damage too, and eventually cancer growth. Processed meat can increase the risk for colorectal cancer, stomach cancer, and breast cancer. Another carcinogen is tobacco smoke. According to the American Cancer Society, tobacco smoke is made up of more than 7,000 chemicals, 70 of which are classified as carcinogens. Some of the common carcinogens in tobacco smoke are acetaldehyde, arsenic, benzene, cadmium, lead, and nickel. A lot of these substances are elements from the periodic table and are definitely not meant to be consumed or inhaled into the body. The more you smoke, the greater your risk is of developing cancer. So even if you start smoking less, you will be benefiting yourself by lowering your risk of getting cancer. if you're not a smoker but are constantly in the presence of someone who is, try to get away from the environment if you can, because even secondhand smoke can cause lung cancer in people who have never smoked before. Cigar smoke is not too different either. It has many of the same carcinogenic chemicals as cigarette smoke. Cigars have high concentrations of nitrates and nitrites, which make organic compounds specific to tobacco called nitrosamines, which are one of the most dangerous carcinogens ever. And if you think smokeless tobacco products are better, they may be a little better, but they're still not safe because they also contain nitrosamines, and they also contain radioactive elements like polonium-210 and even polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are compounds of many chemicals and are carcinogenic. Since you use smokeless tobacco products through your nose and mouth, you're likely to get head and neck cancers, esophageal cancer, and pancreatic cancer. But how exactly do these chemicals cause cancer? Well, the carcinogens in tobacco smoke damage DNA, and cells use DNA as instructions for carrying out tasks that keep the body healthy and functioning. If the carcinogens damage DNA, then the cells use the wrong information as their instructions. Cells may start dividing too often or uncontrollably, and this can lead to cancer development. Some of the carcinogens also make it harder for repair genes to repair damage in DNA, which makes it harder for the body to protect itself against cancer. UV radiation is also a very harmful carcinogen that is a big risk factor for skin cancer. UV rays damage the DNA in cells by making the cytosine and thymine nucleotides pair with other cytosine and thymine nucleotides instead of the guanine and adenine nucleotides. This means that nucleotides in the DNA sequence change, which leads to altered DNA. And cells that use altered DNA don't function properly, which can increase the risk for cancer. Specifically, malignant cancer cells can form in the tissues of the skin, which causes skin cancer. And types of skin cancers that can develop include basal and squamous cell carcinoma, Merkel cell skin cancer, Kaposi sarcoma, and melanoma, which is the most dangerous type of skin cancer. You can get exposed to UV radiation not only by spending a lot of time in the sun, but also by using tanning beds and artificial sources of light that have UV radiation. Now, let's talk about some carcinogens that may be a little harder to control our exposure to. Radon is a gas that you can't smell or see, and it exists in nature in safe amounts. But if it builds up indoors, it can damage the lining of your lungs and cause lung cancer. Radon is the #1 cause of lung cancer in people who don't smoke. This shows how big of a risk radon is and how you may get cancer from something that you can't even smell or see. Asbestos is also a carcinogen that has fibers that can get stuck in your lungs. They're usually found in products like ceiling tiles, roof shingles, and car parts. They aren't harmful if you come into contact with these products, but if the fibers come out of the products, then they can get stuck in your lungs and cause lung cancer. Finally, arsenic is a naturally occurring element that you also can't smell, see, or taste, and we usually take in very small amounts of arsenic through daily actions like breathing and drinking water. However, some forms of arsenic may damage DNA and make it harder for repair genes to fix DNA, causing cancer. Now you know about many carcinogens, and it seems like everywhere you are, there is something that may be harmful to your health. However, there are actions you can take, even small ones, to eliminate the risk of carcinogens from your daily lives. Instead of consuming processed meat, try to eat meats like chicken and fish, and when checking meat labels, avoid buying meats that are salted or cured. Choose fresh meats and avoid eating deli meats. You can even try plant-based protein options like beans, lentils, tofu, and peas. Even if you still want to eat processed meats, try limiting the amount you consume to lower the risk of getting cancer. Try smoking less and make a plan to limit the number of tobacco products you use. To control your exposure to UV radiation, avoid exposure to the sun from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. or at times when sun rays are strong, and wear protective clothing when spending excessive time outdoors, and also wear sunglasses that block at least 99% of UV light. Try to avoid tanning beds and sun lamps, and when you're outdoors, apply broad spectrum sunscreen and make sure you reapply after swimming or sweating every 2 hours. You can purchase tests to check radon levels in your home and wear protective gear when dealing with asbestos or arsenic in the workplace. This was an information-packed episode. We talked about carcinogens, how they cause cancer, the classification systems for carcinogens, and some common carcinogens and how you can avoid them. Remember, while it's impossible to avoid every single carcinogen, your risk for developing cancer will be significantly reduced if you take action to eliminate carcinogens that you do have control over. That's it for this time. Thank you for listening, and please stay tuned for the next episode.